Maya lived in a small apartment on the edge of town with her mother and younger brother. The walls were thin, and the paint was peeling in several places, but it was home. Her mother worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table and ensure the children had what they needed for school. There was never much left over for extras, and Maya understood this from a young age. Every day after school, Maya would walk past the community center on her way home. Through the large windows, she could see the piano sitting in the corner of the main hall. It was an old upright piano, its wood darkened with age, but to Maya, it looked like the most beautiful thing in the world. She would stop and press her nose against the glass, watching whenever someone sat down to play. The community center allowed local residents to use the piano during certain hours, but Maya's mother never had time to take her. Still, the girl would sometimes sneak in when the doors were open and run her fingers across the keys. Barely making a sound, afraid someone would tell her to leave. She taught herself the names of the notes by looking at an old music book she found at the library. At school, Maya was quiet and kept to herself. She wore the same 3 outfits in rotation, hand-me-downs from a cousin who had outgrown them. Her shoes were scuffed and slightly too big, stuffed with tissue paper to make them fit better. The other children noticed these things, as children always do, and some of them whispered and giggled when she walked by. Maya didn't have many friends, but she didn't mind too much. During lunch breaks, while other children played in groups, she would sit under a tree with her notebook, drawing piano keys and writing down melodies she heard in her head. She dreamed of the day she might actually learn to play properly, though she never spoke this dream aloud to anyone. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was kind to her. The elderly woman had taught at the school for 30 years and had a soft spot for quiet, hard-working students. She noticed how Maya's eyes would light up during music class. Even though the school's music program consisted of little more than singing songs together, once a week, Mrs. Patterson had once asked Maya if she liked music, and the girl had nodded so enthusiastically that the teacher smiled for the rest of the day. One afternoon, Maya gathered her courage and stayed late at the community center. The custodian, Mr. Chen, was a gentle man who had seen her looking through the window many times. He pretended not to notice when she slipped inside and sat at the piano bench. Her hands trembled as she placed them on the keys. She pressed down softly, and the note rang out clear and pure. It was a middle C, she remembered from her library book. She pressed another key, then another, creating a simple melody. It wasn't much, just a few notes strung together, but to Maya, it was magic. She returned the next day, and the day after that, always staying quiet, always leaving when she was asked. At home, Maya would tap out rhythms on the kitchen table while her mother cooked dinner. Her mother, exhausted from her long days, would sometimes hum along, not really paying attention but appreciating her daughter's happiness. Maya's little brother would bang on pots and pans, trying to join in, making them all laugh despite their tiredness. The school year was coming to an end, and there were rumors of changes coming. Mrs. Patterson was finally retiring, and a new teacher would be taking over her class in the fall. The students whispered about what the new teacher might be like, whether they would be strict or fun, young or old. Maya didn't participate in these discussions, but she listened quietly, hoping the new teacher would be as kind as Mrs. Patterson. Summer came, and Maya spent her days helping her mother around the house and watching her brother while her mother worked. But every chance she got, she would visit the community center and the piano. Her skills improved slowly but steadily. She learned to read basic sheet music from the library books and could play simple songs with both hands. Mr. Chen, the custodian, began leaving beginner piano books on the bench for her. He never said anything about it, but Maya knew they were for her. She studied them carefully, practicing each exercise until her fingers knew the movements by heart. Sometimes, other people would come to use the piano, and Maya would sit in the corner and watch, absorbing everything she could about how they moved their hands and read the music. As summer faded and fall approached, Maya felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about the new school year. She was moving up to the 5th grade, which felt like a big step. She wondered if she would finally make a real friend this year, someone who might understand her love for music. She carefully prepared her school supplies, covering her notebooks with brown paper bags to protect them. writing her name neatly on each one. The night before school started, Maya lay in bed listening to the sounds of the city outside her window. She thought about the piano at the community center and how much joy it brought her. She thought about the new teacher and hoped they would be understanding and patient. She had no way of knowing that the coming year would change everything, that a single moment would test her courage in ways she never imagined, and that the piano she loved so much would become the center of both her greatest fear and her biggest triumph. As sleep finally came, Maya dreamed of music, her fingers dancing across invisible keys, playing a song that existed only in her heart. The first day of school arrived with the crispness of early autumn. Maya walked into her new classroom and immediately felt the difference. The warm, cluttered space that Mrs. Patterson had maintained was now stark and organized. Everything had its place, and even the colorful posters on the walls seemed to hang at more precise angles. Behind the desk stood Ms. Victoria Hartley, the new teacher. She was a tall woman in her early 30s, impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her sharp eyes swept across the classroom as students filed in. She had an air of authority that made even the loudest children quiet down immediately. Ms. Hartley came from a prestigious private school across the city. She had accepted this position at the public school as a stepping stone in her career, though she made no secret of the fact that she found the change challenging. She was used to students from wealthy families, children who came to school with the best supplies, and parents who were heavily involved in education. As the students took their seats, Ms. Hartley introduced herself with a speech about excellence, discipline, and high expectations. She explained that she would not tolerate laziness, excuses, or subpar work. Her previous students, she mentioned more than once, had consistently won academic competitions and earned top marks. She expected nothing less here. Maya sat in the third row, listening carefully and feeling a knot form in her stomach. This teacher was very different from gentle Mrs. Patterson. When Ms. Hartley's eyes passed over her, Maya noticed the briefest pause, a slight narrowing of the gaze as the teacher took in her worn clothing and old backpack. It was a look Maya had seen before, and it made her sink lower in her seat. The first week of school revealed Ms. Hartley's teaching style. She was efficient and organized, but there was no warmth in her approach. She called on students rapidly, expecting quick, correct answers. When someone struggled, she would sigh with impatience and move on to another student, leaving the first one feeling embarrassed and small. Maya noticed that Ms. Hartley seemed to favor certain students. Children who came from well-off families, who had nice clothes and spoke with confidence, received more attention and praise. When these students answered incorrectly, Ms. Hartley would gently guide them to the right answer. But when students like Maya made mistakes, the teacher's tone was clipped and dismissive. One morning, Ms. Hartley assigned a project that required materials from home. Students needed poster board, markers, printed pictures, and decorative supplies. Maya's heart sank as she wrote down the list. She knew her mother couldn't afford these things right now. That evening, she asked anyway, trying to keep her voice light and hopeful. Her mother's face fell as she looked at the list. She had just paid the electric bill, and money was especially tight this month. She promised to do what she could, maybe find some materials at the dollar store, but Maya could see the worry in her eyes. The girl told her mother not to worry, that she would figure something out. When project day came, the difference was obvious. Some students brought in elaborate displays with professionally printed photos and expensive materials. Maya had done her best with cardboard from a box, borrowed markers from the school library, and pictures she had carefully drawn by hand. She had worked hard on it, staying up late to make sure every detail was perfect. Ms. Hartley walked around the room, examining each project. She praised the expensive-looking displays, holding them up for the class to see as examples of excellent work. When she reached Maya's desk, she stopped and stared at the handmade project for a long moment. The room fell silent. The teacher didn't say anything at first, just made a mark in her gradebook and moved on. But Maya heard the whispers from other students and saw their looks. She felt her face burn with shame. Later, when Ms. Hartley handed back the graded projects, Maya received a C- with a note that said, "Insufficient effort. See me after class." After school, Maya approached the teacher's desk with shaking hands. Ms. Hartley looked up from her paperwork with an expression of cool assessment. She told Maya that she expected more from her students, that turning in substandard work was unacceptable. Maya tried to explain that she had worked very hard, but Ms. Hartley cut her off. The teacher said that excuses wouldn't help Maya in life, that she needed to learn to meet expectations regardless of circumstances. She suggested that Maya needed to try harder, pay more attention, and take her education more seriously. The girl left the classroom with tears stinging her eyes, clutching her project with its disappointing grade. The next few weeks only got worse. Ms. Hartley seemed to have decided that Maya was a lazy student who needed to be pushed harder. She called on her frequently, but only with the most difficult questions. When Maya stumbled over an answer, the teacher would make comments about students needing to study more or pay better attention. During lunch, Maya overheard Ms. Hartley talking with another teacher in the hallway. The new teacher was complaining about the challenges of teaching at this school, how different it was from her previous position. She mentioned that some students clearly came from homes where education wasn't valued, where parents didn't have the time or resources to properly support their children's learning. Maya knew, somehow, that Ms. Hartley was thinking of her when she said these things. The realization hurt more than she expected. She began to dread going to class, her stomach twisting into knots every morning. Her love of learning, which had always sustained her, began to dim under the constant criticism and cold treatment. At home, Maya became quieter. Her mother noticed, but was too tired from work to press the issue. The girl stopped talking about school, stopped sharing the little triumphs of her day. She still visited the piano at the community center, but even that brought less joy now. The music that had once felt like freedom now reminded her of all the things she couldn't have, all the ways she didn't measure up. Ms. Hartley announced to the class that they would be having a special music appreciation day in a few weeks. She talked about the importance of culture and refinement, mentioning that her previous school had held concerts where students performed on various instruments. She asked if any students in this class played instruments. Several hands went up. Children mentioned piano lessons, violin lessons, guitar classes. Ms. Hartley nodded approvingly at each one, making notes. Maya kept her hand down, her eyes fixed on her desk. She did play piano in her own way, but she couldn't imagine telling Ms. Hartley about her secret hours at the community center, teaching herself from library books. As the teacher continued talking about music and culture, Maya felt the walls closing in. She had no idea that this upcoming music day would become the most terrifying and transformative experience of her young life. That Ms. Hartley's prejudices would set in motion events that neither of them could predict. For now, she just wanted to become invisible, to disappear into her seat and avoid the teacher's sharp gaze and sharper words. The weeks leading up to Music Appreciation Day were filled with preparations. Students who had mentioned playing instruments were excused from regular class. Time to practice their pieces. Ms. Hartley arranged for them to use the music room, bringing in their violins and flutes from home. She supervised these practice sessions with an approving eye, offering suggestions and encouragement. Maya watched all of this from the sidelines. During these practice periods, she and the other students who didn't play instruments were given busy worksheets and reading assignments to complete while their classmates prepared. The division between those who had private lessons and those who didn't became more visible each day. One afternoon, Maya was walking past the music room when she heard someone playing piano. She stopped to listen, drawn by the familiar sound. Through the small window in the door, she saw Jennifer, one of the popular girls, sitting at the school's old upright piano. Jennifer's family was wealthy, and she had been taking lessons since she was 5 years old. The piece Jennifer was playing was complicated, full of runs and trills, but something about it sounded mechanical to Maya, like the girl was hitting all the right notes without really feeling the music. Maya closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her, her fingers unconsciously moving as if she were the one playing. Imagining how she might add more emotion to the phrases, Ms. Hartley appeared beside her suddenly, making Maya jump. The teacher asked if she was supposed to be wandering the hallways instead of working on her assignments. Maya quickly apologized and hurried back to the classroom, feeling the teacher's disapproving gaze on her back. But in that brief moment, Ms. Hartley had noticed something. The way Maya's fingers had been moving, the concentrated look on her face. The next day, Ms. Hartley made an announcement that surprised everyone. She said that Music Appreciation Day would include not just performances by students with training, but also an opportunity for any student to try playing an instrument, even if they had never had lessons. She explained that this would help everyone appreciate how difficult it was to master music, how much work went into becoming proficient. Several students exchanged glances, unsure what this meant. Maya felt a prickle of unease, but didn't know why. Ms. Hartley's smile seemed to have an edge to it, like there was something happening beneath the surface that the students couldn't quite see. The teacher's eyes swept across the room and landed on Maya for just a moment too long. That afternoon, after most students had left, Ms. Hartley called Maya to her desk. The girl approached slowly, wondering what she had done wrong now. The teacher shuffled some papers before looking up, her expression unreadable. She told Maya that she had noticed her interest in the piano playing the other day, standing outside the music room. Maya nodded cautiously, unsure where this was going. Ms. Hartley continued, saying that she thought it would be educational for the class to see the difference between a trained musician and someone with no experience. She said that Maya would be playing the piano during Music Appreciation Day to demonstrate this contrast. The girl's stomach dropped. She tried to explain that she wasn't comfortable with that she would rather not participate. But Ms. Hartley's tone left no room for argument. She said that all students needed to be involved, that Maya couldn't expect to always sit on the sidelines. Besides, the teacher added with a thin smile, it would be a good learning experience. Maya felt trapped. She wanted to tell Ms. Hartley that she actually did know how to play, but fear held her tongue. What if the teacher asked where she had learned? What if she demanded proof of lessons she couldn't provide? What if Maya played and it wasn't good enough, and the teacher used it as another example of her inadequacy? Instead, Maya nodded silently and accepted the assignment. Ms. Hartley seemed satisfied, dismissing her with a wave. As Maya walked home, her mind raced with panic. She understood what was happening. The teacher wanted to humiliate her, to use her as an example of what happened when students didn't have proper training and resources. It would be another way to highlight the divide between the privileged students and those like Maya. That night, Maya couldn't eat dinner. Her mother noticed her picking at her food and asked what was wrong. Maya wanted to tell her everything about Ms. Hartley's coldness, about the upcoming performance, about how scared she felt. But she looked at her mother's tired face and couldn't add another worry to her burden. She just said she wasn't feeling well and went to bed early. In her room, Maya lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the piano at the community center, about all the hours she had spent there teaching herself. She had never played in front of people before. What if she froze? What if her hands shook too much? What if all her self-taught skills fell apart under pressure and she really did humiliate herself? The next day at school, word had spread about Maya's assignment. Some students looked at her with sympathy, understanding that Ms. Hartley had put her in an impossible position. Others whispered and giggled, already anticipating the entertainment of watching her fail. Jennifer, the girl with years of piano lessons, looked at Maya with something like pity mixed with superiority. Ms. Hartley seemed pleased with the atmosphere she had created. During class, she made several comments about Music Appreciation Day, building anticipation. She talked about how important it was to understand the dedication required for musical excellence, how years of practice and proper instruction made all the difference. Each comment felt like an arrow aimed directly at Maya. Maya tried to focus on her schoolwork, but concentration was impossible. She kept thinking about the performance, imagining all the ways it could go wrong. She pictured herself sitting at the piano in front of the whole class, her mind going blank, her fingers fumbling uselessly at the keys, while Ms. Hartley watched with that satisfied expression. After school, Maya went to the community center earlier than usual. Mr. Chen noticed her distressed face and asked if everything was okay. For the first time, Maya told someone about what was happening. The old custodian listened carefully, his kind eyes full of concern. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then Mr. Chen told her something she would never forget. He said that sometimes people try to make us feel small because they are small inside themselves. He said that music wasn't about having expensive lessons or fancy certificates. It was about what lived in your heart and came out through your fingers. He told her to play, not for the teacher or the other students, but for herself. For the love of music that brought her to this piano every day. His words helped, but Maya was still terrified. She sat at the piano and tried to practice, but her hands were shaking. She played through simple pieces, then more complex ones, trying to prepare. But how could she prepare for something designed to humiliate her? How could she turn this situation around when the teacher had already decided she would fail? As the days counted down to Music Appreciation Day, the tension in Maya's chest grew tighter. She barely slept, barely ate. Her little brother asked why she was so sad, and she forced a smile for him. At school, Ms. Hartley watched her with barely concealed anticipation, like a cat watching a mouse it had cornered. Maya thought about pretending to be sick on the day of the performance. But she knew that would only delay the inevitable. Ms. Hartley would reschedule it, and the dread would continue. She felt trapped in a nightmare with no way out. The teacher had created a perfect scenario where Maya would be exposed and humiliated in front of everyone. Proof of Ms. Hartley's unspoken belief that students like Maya, from poor families with no advantages, could never measure up to their wealthier peers. Music Appreciation Day arrived on a Friday morning. The classroom had been transformed, with chairs arranged in rows facing the front where various instruments were displayed. Parents had been invited to attend, and several sat along the back wall, cameras ready. The principal, Mr. Morrison, was also present, sitting in the corner with an encouraging smile for the young performers. Maya arrived early, her stomach in knots. She had barely slept the night before, running through pieces in her mind over and over. She wore her best outfit, a dress her mother had carefully washed and ironed the night before. It was still worn and faded, but it was clean. Her mother had wanted to come watch, but she couldn't miss work, and Maya was secretly relieved. She didn't want her mother to witness what was about to happen. Ms. Hartley greeted the arriving students with unusual cheerfulness. She directed everyone to their seats and made small talk with the visiting parents. Maya noticed how different the teacher seemed around adults, especially the well-dressed parents of her favorite students. She was warm and engaging, laughing at their jokes and complimenting their children. The performances began with a violin solo. A boy named Marcus played a classical piece his instructor had chosen, executing it competently, if not brilliantly. The audience clapped politely. Next came a flute duet by two girls who had been taking lessons together for years. Their performance was sweet and well-rehearsed. Jennifer's piano performance was scheduled near the middle of the program. She sat down at the school's upright piano with confidence, adjusting the bench and placing her sheet music, just so. Ms. Hartley introduced her with glowing praise, mentioning her years of study and numerous recital performances. Jennifer played a complicated chop-in piece, her fingers moving rapidly across the keys. The audience was impressed, applauding enthusiastically when she finished. Jennifer stood and took a small bow, her face flushed with pride. Ms. Hartley beamed at her, telling everyone how this was a perfect example of what dedication and proper training could achieve. Maya's hands grew cold as she watched, knowing her turn was coming soon. Several more performances followed, each student playing pieces they had practiced with their private instructors. A boy played guitar, twin sisters performed a clarinet duet, another girl sang an operatic piece. Ms. Hartley introduced each one with warmth, highlighting their training and accomplishments. The unspoken message was clear. These were serious students who had invested time and money in developing real skills. Then Ms. Hartley's tone changed. She stood before the audience with a different kind of smile, one that made Maya's blood run cold. The teacher explained that the next performance would be different, an educational demonstration. She talked about how important it was to understand that musical ability didn't come naturally, that without proper instruction and resources, even someone with interest couldn't possibly achieve competence. Maya felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Ms. Hartley called her name, gesturing toward the piano. The girl stood on shaking legs and walked to the front of the room. The distance seemed enormous. She could hear whispers starting, could feel the mixture of curiosity and pity from her classmates. The visiting parents looked confused, unsure what was about to happen. Ms. Hartley continued her introduction, explaining that Maya had never had piano lessons, came from a family that couldn't afford such luxuries, and had no musical training whatsoever. The teacher said this was an important lesson about the value of education and resources, about understanding one's limitations. Some parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing something unkind in the teacher's words. Maya sat down at the piano bench, her hands trembling so badly she had to press them against her lap to steady them. Ms. Hartley stood beside the piano, arms crossed, that thin smile still on her face. The teacher suggested that Maya just do her best, try a simple scale perhaps, something that wouldn't be too embarrassing. The condescension in her voice was barely masked. The room was completely silent. Maya could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She looked down at the piano keys, and they seemed to blur before her eyes. This was the moment Ms. Hartley had orchestrated, the humiliation she had carefully planned. Maya was supposed to fumble, to prove the teacher's point about class and privilege and opportunity. But something stirred in Maya's chest. She thought about all the afternoons at the community center, hours spent with her fingers on these same black and white keys. She thought about Mr. Chun's words, about playing for herself and for the love of music. She thought about her mother, working 2 jobs, trying so hard to give her children everything she could. She thought about her little brother, who believed his sister could do anything. Maya's hands stopped trembling. She placed them on the keys, feeling their familiar smoothness. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Ms. Hartley shifted beside her, perhaps expecting Maya to ask what she should play, or to freeze completely. But Maya didn't look at the teacher. She didn't look at anyone. She thought about the music that lived inside her, the melodies she heard in her dreams, the pieces she had taught herself, note by note, measure by measure. She thought about how the piano had been her friend when she had no others, her comfort when school was hard, her joy when everything else seemed difficult. Maya decided in that moment that she wouldn't play something simple to minimize her embarrassment. She wouldn't play a scale or a basic exercise. If Ms. Hartley wanted a demonstration, Maya would give her one. She would play what was in her heart, and whatever happened next would happen. The girl opened her eyes and looked at the keys with clarity and purpose. She positioned her hands properly, the way she had taught herself from the library books and from watching others. She straightened her back, relaxed her shoulders, and let her fingers find their starting position. The room remained silent, everyone waiting. Ms. Hartley's smile was beginning to look strained, as if she expected Maya to give up any moment. Some students looked away, uncomfortable witnessing what they thought would be humiliation. The principal watched with a thoughtful expression, sensing something in the girl's posture that surprised him. Maya began to play. The first notes rang out clear and pure, filling the classroom with sound. She had chosen a piece she loved, a classical composition she had learned from one of Mr. Chun's books. It was not an easy piece, not something a beginner would attempt. Her fingers moved across the keys with unexpected confidence, and the music flowed from the piano like water from a spring. Ms. Hartley's expression began to change, the smile fading, replaced by confusion and then something else, something like shock. The students who had looked away turned back, their mouths falling open. The parents leaned forward in their seats, sudden attention replacing their polite boredom. Principal Morrison sat up straighter, his eyes widening. Maya played on, her fear dissolving into the music. Every note she had practiced alone in the community center, every melody she had worked out by trial and error, every hour she had spent teaching herself was flowing through her fingers now. This was only the beginning, and already the room was transformed. The music filled every corner of the classroom. reaching into spaces that had been cold and uninviting since Ms. Hartley arrived. Maya's fingers danced across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for someone with no formal training. The piece she had chosen was Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Third movement, a challenging composition that even advanced students struggled with. Her initial nervousness had given way to something deeper, a connection with the music that transcended technique. Yes, her fingers knew where to go, knew the patterns and progressions she had painstakingly taught herself. But there was something more in her playing, an emotion that couldn't be learned from books or lessons, a raw honesty that came from playing music not to impress anyone, but because she loved it. Miss Hartley stood frozen beside the piano, her carefully constructed plan crumbling around her. This wasn't supposed to happen. The girl was supposed to stumble through a few notes, maybe manage a simple scale, proving the teacher's point about the necessity of proper instruction and resources. Instead, music of extraordinary beauty was pouring from the piano, played by the very student Ms. Hartley had dismissed as unmotivated and limited. The other students sat transfixed. Jennifer, who had felt so proud of her own performance moments ago, felt something shift inside her. She had played all the right notes in her chop-in piece, executed it exactly as her expensive instructor had taught her. But listening to Maya play, she realized there was a difference between playing music correctly and making music come alive. Maya was doing the latter. In the back row, parents whispered to each other. Some pulled out their phones to record this unexpected performance. A mother who had been checking her email moments before set her phone down completely, drawn in by the passion in Maya's playing. The principal, Mr. Morrison, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, a slow smile spreading across his face. Maya was lost in the music now, barely aware of her audience. Her eyes were closed again, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. The difficult passages that had taken her weeks to master flowed from her fingers as naturally as breathing. She played through a section that required her hands to cross over each other rapidly, executing it flawlessly. She navigated the complex runs and arpeggios with a confidence that came from hours of solitary practice. The piece demanded both technical skill and emotional depth. There were moments of thundering power where her hands struck the keys with force, filling the room with dramatic sound. Then, just as suddenly, the music would soften to a whisper, delicate notes that seemed to hang in the air like morning mist. Maya captured all of it, the anger and the tenderness, the storm and the calm. Some students had tears in their eyes, moved by something they couldn't quite name. Music had always been background noise in their lives, something pleasant but not particularly meaningful. Now they were experiencing it as a force, a language that spoke directly to something inside them. Even the boys who usually joked around and disrupted class sat perfectly still, captivated. Ms. Hartley's face had gone pale. She tried to maintain her composure, but her hands were clenched at her sides, and a muscle jumped in her jaw. She was watching her assumptions be proven wrong in the most public way possible. Everything she had believed about this child, about students from poor families, about the necessity of privilege and resources for true achievement, was being challenged by the music filling the room. Maya moved into the final section of the piece, the part she had worried about most, because it was the most technically demanding. Her wrists were getting tired, but she pushed through, determined to finish what she had started. The notes came faster, building to the climactic ending. Her fingers flew across the keys in a blur of motion, striking each note with precision and power. The classroom seemed to hold its breath. Even the air felt different, charged with something electric. Students who had never paid attention in music class before suddenly understood why people dedicated their lives to this art form. Parents who had brought their children to private lessons out of obligation rather than passion saw, perhaps for the first time, what music could really be. Mr. Chen, the custodian, had been passing by the classroom and stopped when he heard the piano. He stood outside the door, listening through the small window, his eyes glistening with tears. He had watched this child come to the community center day after day, teaching herself with determination and love. Now she was showing everyone what he had always known, that talent and dedication could flourish anywhere, even in the most unlikely circumstances. Maya approached the final measures of the piece. Her heart was pounding, but her hands remained steady. She thought of her mother, wished she could be here to see this moment. She thought of her little brother, how proud he would be. She thought of every person who had ever made her feel small or less than because of where she came from, or what she wore, or what she didn't have. The last notes rang out strong and clear. Maya's hands came down on the final chord, holding it, letting it resonate through the room. She pressed the sustain pedal, allowing the sound to linger, filling the space with its richness. Then, slowly, she lifted her hands from the keys. The chord faded gradually, like the last light of sunset, until finally there was silence. For a moment, no one moved. The room was suspended in that silence, as if everyone needed a moment to return to reality from wherever the music had taken them. Maya sat at the piano, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes still closed, not quite ready to face what came next. Then the silence broke. One person started clapping, then another, and suddenly the entire room erupted in applause. It wasn't the polite applause that had followed the other performances. This was genuine, enthusiastic, the kind of applause that comes from being truly moved. Students were on their feet, clapping and cheering. Parents were applauding with real appreciation, some wiping their eyes. Principal Morrison was standing, clapping louder than anyone, a huge grin on his face. He looked at Ms. Hartley, and his expression held a question, a challenge. The teacher stood rigid, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. She had no choice but to join the applause, though her hands moved stiffly, mechanically. Maya finally opened her eyes and looked out at the room. She saw the standing ovation, saw her classmates' faces full of surprise and admiration, saw the principal's approving smile. She saw Jennifer looking at her with new respect. She saw the parents who had been strangers moments ago now looking at her like she was something special. And she saw Ms. Hartley, still clapping, but with an expression Maya couldn't quite read. The teacher's plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of humiliating Maya and proving her point about privilege and resources, she had given the girl a stage to reveal her extraordinary gift. The room was still filled with applause, and Maya sat at the piano, overwhelmed by what had just happened. Her secret talent now exposed for everyone to see. Maya stood from the piano bench on shaking legs, overwhelmed by the continued applause. She had never experienced anything like this before, this wall of approval and appreciation. Her classmates were calling out compliments, their voices overlapping with excitement. Several students were asking each other if they had known Maya could play like that, their tones full of amazement. Principal Morrison made his way through the crowd of parents and students to reach Maya. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his face beaming with pride. He told her that was one of the most remarkable performances he had witnessed in his 20 years as an educator. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear, and Maya felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of embarrassment and joy. The principal turned to address the room, his voice carrying authority and warmth. He spoke about how true talent could emerge from anywhere, how dedication and passion were more important than expensive lessons or privileged backgrounds. He talked about how the school's mission was to help every student reach their potential, regardless of their circumstances. Several parents nodded in agreement, and Maya noticed a few of them glancing at Ms. Hartley with questioning expressions. Ms. Hartley's face had regained some color, but her smile looked strained. She tried to take control of the situation, stepping forward to announce that they should continue with the rest of the program. But the energy in the room had shifted completely. The remaining performances, though competent, felt anticlimactic after what everyone had just witnessed. During the final performances, parents kept looking back at Maya, whispering to each other. A woman in an elegant suit approached her during a break, introducing herself as Mrs. Chen. No relation to the custodian, she explained that she was a piano instructor in the city and asked where Maya had studied. When Maya quietly admitted she had taught herself, the woman's eyebrows rose in genuine shock. Mrs. Chen told Maya that what she had just done was extraordinary, that self-taught musicians of her caliber were exceptionally rare. She pulled out a business card and pressed it into Maya's hand, telling her to have her mother call. She said she would be honored to give Maya lessons, and that they could work out an arrangement regarding payment. Maya clutched the card like it was made of gold, hardly believing this was real. Other parents wanted to talk to her too. A man who owned a local music store offered to help her get sheet music. A mother who worked at the community college mentioned their youth music program. Maya felt dizzy with all the attention, so different from the isolation she was used to. Her classmates were looking at her with new eyes, seeing someone they had overlooked or dismissed before. When Music Appreciation Day finally ended and parents began leaving, Principal Morrison asked Ms. Hartley to step into the hallway. Students gathered their things slowly, many lingering to talk to Maya. Jennifer approached hesitantly, her earlier pride replaced with humility. She told Maya that her playing was beautiful, that she had never heard the piano sound like that before. The compliment, coming from the girl who had seemed so perfect and untouchable, meant more than Maya could express. In the hallway, Principal Morrison's conversation with Ms. Hartley was quiet but intense. Other teachers passed by and could sense the tension. The principal questioned why he had not been informed about Maya's musical ability before today. Ms. Hartley tried to explain that she hadn't known either, but Mr. Morrison's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. The principal pointed out that as an educator, it was Ms. Hartley's responsibility to discover and nurture her students' talents, not to make assumptions about them based on their backgrounds. He reminded her that every child deserved to be seen and valued. Ms. Hartley nodded, her jaw tight, her hands clasped in front of her. She understood that her attempt to humiliate Maya had not only failed, but had also revealed something troubling about her own prejudices. Back in the classroom, Maya was surrounded by students asking questions. How long had she been playing? Where did she practice? Could she teach them? Would she play again sometime? The attention was overwhelming but not unpleasant. For the first time since school started, Maya felt like she belonged. Like she was part of something rather than watching from the outside. When the final bell rang and students rushed out for the weekend, Maya gathered her things slowly. Ms. Hartley had returned to the classroom and was organizing papers at her desk. Not meeting anyone's eyes, Maya needed to pass by the teacher's desk to leave. She walked forward with her backpack slung over one shoulder, unsure what to expect. Ms. Hartley looked up as Maya approached. For a long moment, the two of them just looked at each other. The teacher's face showed a complicated mixture of emotions, embarrassment, anger, and perhaps the first stirrings of shame. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. Finally, she simply nodded at Maya, a small gesture that acknowledged something had changed between them. Maya walked out of the classroom and into the bright afternoon. The world looked different somehow, more colorful and full of possibility. She clutched Mrs. Chun's business card in her hand, already imagining telling her mother about it. She thought about proper piano lessons, about learning from a real teacher, about all the music she could explore with guidance and support. At the community center, Mr. Chen was waiting by the piano as usual. He had heard about the performance from another teacher who had been there, and his face split into a huge grin when Maya walked in. He hugged her briefly, telling her how proud he was, how he knew she had it in her all along. Maya felt tears prick her eyes at his kindness. This man who had quietly helped her pursue her passion when no one else was paying attention. She sat at the piano and played again, but this time it was different. There was a lightness in her playing now, a freedom that came from no longer hiding her gift. She played piece after piece, letting the music flow through her. Celebrating this strange and wonderful day, Mr. Chen sat nearby, listening with closed eyes and a peaceful smile. That evening, when Maya's mother came home from work, exhausted, as always, Maya showed her the business card. She told her mother everything, the words tumbling out in a rush. The performance, the applause, the piano teacher who wanted to give her lessons. Her mother listened with growing astonishment, tears streaming down her face. Her mother pulled her into a tight hug, telling her how proud she was, how she had always known Maya was special. She said they would call Mrs. Chen first thing Monday morning, that they would figure out the money somehow. Maya's little brother jumped around the small kitchen, excited by his sister's excitement, even though he didn't fully understand what had happened. As Maya lay in bed that night, she replayed the day in her mind. She thought about Ms. Hartley's face during the performance, the shock and confusion replacing the expected satisfaction. She thought about her classmates' cheers, the principal's praise, Mrs. Chen's offer. Most of all, she thought about how it felt to sit at that piano and let her music be heard. To stop hiding and start sharing the things she loved most. Maya understood that nothing would erase the weeks of coldness and criticism from Ms. Hartley. The hurt the teacher had caused was real, and the attempt to humiliate her had been cruel. But somehow, through all of that darkness, something beautiful had emerged. Maya had found her voice, not just in music, but in herself. She had discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed, and tomorrow, the world would be different because today, she had refused to be made small. The weekend passed in a blur of excitement and phone calls. On Saturday morning, Maya's mother contacted Mrs. Chen, the piano instructor who had given Maya her business card. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, with Mrs. Chen expressing genuine enthusiasm about taking Maya as a student. She explained that she rarely encountered someone with such natural talent and emotional depth in their playing. When Maya's mother brought up the subject of payment, worried about how they would afford lessons, Mrs. Chen surprised them both. She said that she believed every child with genuine passion and talent deserved the chance to develop their gift. She offered to teach Maya for a reduced rate and suggested they could work out a payment plan that fit their budget. She even mentioned that as Maya developed, there might be scholarship opportunities and competitions that could help support her musical education. Maya could hardly believe her good fortune. For so long, the piano had been something she pursued alone, in secret, stealing moments at the community center. Now, suddenly, doors were opening that she had never imagined possible. Her mother cried again, overwhelmed by the generosity of a stranger who saw something valuable in her daughter. On Monday morning, Maya walked into school with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She didn't know what to expect from Ms. Hartley or her classmates after Friday's dramatic performance. As she entered the building, several students she barely knew stopped her to say they had heard about her piano playing. Word had spread over the weekend, carried by parents who had been in attendance and students who had witnessed the moment. In the classroom, the atmosphere was different. Students who had ignored Maya before now smiled at her when she entered. Some moved their backpacks to make space for her to sit near them. Jennifer, who had always been at the center of the popular group, waved Maya over to sit beside her. The gesture was small but significant. An olive branch extended across the social divide that had separated them before. Ms. Hartley was already at her desk when Maya arrived. The teacher looked up briefly when Maya entered, their eyes meeting for just a moment before Ms. Hartley looked away. There was something different in the teacher's expression, a crack in the armor of certainty she usually wore. She seemed smaller, somehow, less imposing. As class began, Ms. Hartley's teaching style showed subtle changes. She still maintained order and expected excellence, but the sharp edge in her voice had softened. When she called on Maya to answer a question and the girl hesitated, the teacher gave her time to think rather than moving on impatiently to another student. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but it was noticeable. During lunch, Maya found herself surrounded by classmates who wanted to hear about her music. They asked how she had learned to play so well, where she practiced, what other pieces she knew. She told them about the community center and Mr. Chen's kindness, about teaching herself from library books, about hours spent figuring out melodies by ear. Her story fascinated them. This tale of dedication and passion pursued despite obstacles. One boy named Marcus, who had played violin during Music Appreciation Day, asked if Maya would be interested in playing together sometime. He said his violin teacher was always looking for piano accompanists for recitals. Maya agreed eagerly, excited by the possibility of playing with another musician. More opportunities seemed to be appearing every day, connections forming where before there had been only isolation. In the afternoon, Principal Morrison visited the classroom. He announced that the school would be organizing a talent showcase in 2 months, an evening event where students could display their abilities in various areas. He looked directly at Maya and said he hoped she would consider performing. Several students immediately chimed in that Maya had to play piano. that everyone needed to hear her. Miss Hartley sat at her desk during this announcement, her face carefully neutral. But Maya noticed that the teacher's hands were gripping a pen tightly, her knuckles white. The principal's message was clear. Though unspoken, Maya's talent would be celebrated and showcased, not hidden or dismissed. The school valued her, even if her teacher initially had not. After school, Maya headed to the community center for her usual practice time. Mr. Chen greeted her with his customary warmth, but she noticed several other people in the main hall who hadn't been there before. They explained that they had heard about her performance and wanted to hear her play. The community center director, a woman named Ms. Rodriguez, approached Maya with a proposal. Ms. Rodriguez said that the center was planning a community arts day, and she would love for Maya to be part of the program. She could perform for the neighborhood, inspire other young people who might think music was only for those who could afford expensive lessons. Maya agreed, feeling both honored and nervous about playing for an audience again. Over the next few weeks, Maya's life transformed in ways she couldn't have imagined. She started lessons with Mrs. Chen, who immediately began expanding her technical skills while praising the emotional intelligence she brought to every piece. The instructor introduced her to new composers and styles, challenging her with more complex works. Maya absorbed everything like a sponge, her progress rapid and consistent. At school, Ms. Hartley's attitude toward Maya continued to shift gradually. The teacher never apologized directly for her earlier behavior, but her actions spoke louder than words could. She started giving Maya opportunities to help other students, recognizing her as a leader rather than dismissing her as inadequate. When assigning group projects, Ms. Hartley made sure Maya was partnered with students who would value her contributions. One day, Ms. Hartley asked Maya to stay after class. Maya approached the teacher's desk with some trepidation, old fears rising despite the recent changes. But Ms. Hartley's expression was different from their previous after-school conversations. She looked uncomfortable, struggling to find words. The teacher finally spoke, telling Maya that she had been thinking a lot since Music Appreciation Day. She admitted, though it clearly cost her pride to do so, that she had made assumptions about Maya based on circumstances rather than character. She said that Maya's performance had taught her something important about looking beneath the surface, about recognizing that talent and determination could flourish anywhere. Ms. Hartley said she had contacted several organizations about music, scholarships and opportunities for talented students from low-income families. She had compiled a folder of information for Maya and her mother. The teacher handed over the folder, and Maya saw it was thick with printouts, applications, and resources. The gesture was Ms. Hartley's way of trying to make amends, of helping rather than hindering. Maya thanked her quietly, understanding that this was as close to an apology as she might receive. She also understood that Ms. Hartley's change of heart, while genuine, had been forced by circumstances. If Maya had stumbled during that performance, if she had failed as expected, would the teacher have learned this lesson? Maya couldn't know for sure, but she chose to accept the help being offered now. The talent showcase arrived, and this time Maya's mother was able to attend. She sat in the front row, her face glowing with pride. Maya's little brother sat beside her, dressed in his best clothes, serious and important. When Maya took the stage, she looked out at the audience and saw not just her family, but Mr. Chen, Mrs. Chen, her instructor, Ms. Rodriguez from the community center, her classmates, and yes, Ms. Hartley too. Maya played a piece she had been working on with Mrs. Chen. A beautiful composition that showcased both her technical growth and her natural gift for emotional expression. The performance was even better than her first public one. Informed now, by proper instruction, but still carrying that unique quality that made her playing special. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. As Maya stood to bow, she caught Ms. Hartley's eye. The teacher was clapping with genuine appreciation, and there was something in her expression that looked like respect, perhaps even admiration. The moment passed quickly, but Maya understood its significance. She had not only proven herself, but had also taught her teacher a valuable lesson about preconceptions, prejudice, and the importance of seeing each student as an individual with unique potential. As the school year progressed, Maya's life continued to unfold in remarkable ways. The scholarship information Ms. Hartley had provided led to Maya applying for several programs. In the spring, she received notification that she had been accepted into a prestigious summer music camp with a full scholarship. The camp was usually attended by students from wealthy families. But Maya's audition tape had impressed the judges so thoroughly that they had waived all fees and even provided a stipend for supplies. Her mother cried when they received the news, holding the acceptance letter like it was made of precious metal. Maya would spend 6 weeks that summer studying with renowned musicians. Living on a college campus, immersed completely in music, it was an opportunity that would have seemed impossible just months ago. Before that day when Miss Hartley had tried to humiliate her, Ms. Hartley herself underwent a gradual but noticeable transformation throughout the year. She became more thoughtful in her interactions with all students, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. She started an after-school homework help program, staying late to assist students who needed extra support. She organized a clothing swap so students could get nicer clothes without the stigma of charity. Her colleagues noticed the change, commenting that she seemed softer, more empathetic. One afternoon in late April, Ms. Hartley approached Maya with an unusual request. The district was holding a professional development day for teachers, focused on recognizing and nurturing talent in underserved populations. The organizers wanted a student to speak about their experience. Ms. Hartley asked if Maya would be willing to share her story. Maya's first instinct was to refuse. The idea of standing in front of dozens of teachers and discussing how one of them had tried to humiliate her felt uncomfortable and potentially embarrassing for Ms. Hartley, but her teacher surprised her by saying that Maya should tell the complete truth, including the parts that reflected poorly on her. Ms. Hartley said that other educators needed to hear it, that her mistake could become a learning opportunity. Maya agreed, and on the day of the presentation, she stood before an auditorium full of teachers and told her story. She talked about loving music, but having no resources to pursue it. She described teaching herself at the community center, the isolation she felt at school, and yes, the day Ms. Hartley had called her to the piano, expecting her to fail. She spoke clearly and honestly, not with bitterness but with the wisdom of someone who had lived through difficulty and emerged stronger. The teachers listened in silence, many shifting uncomfortably in their seats as they recognized their own biases reflected in the story. Maya concluded by saying that while what happened had been painful, it had also forced her hidden talent into the light. She said that Ms. Hartley's later efforts to help had opened doors Maya might never have found alone. She urged teachers to look beyond what students wore or where they came from, to search for the spark of potential in every child. The applause that followed was thoughtful rather than enthusiastic, the kind of response that comes from being challenged rather than entertained. Several teachers approached Maya afterward with tears in their eyes, thanking her for her courage in sharing. Ms. Hartley watched from the side of the auditorium, her expression complex but not defensive. She was learning to sit with her discomfort rather than deflecting from it. The school year ended with Maya performing at the 5th grade graduation ceremony. She played a piece she had composed herself, weaving together melodies from her self-taught days with the sophisticated techniques Mrs. Chen had shown her. The original composition was a reflection of her journey, beginning with simple, hesitant notes that gradually built into something complex and beautiful. As Maya played, she looked out at the audience. Her mother and brother sat beaming in the front row. Mr. Chen was there, having taken time off work to attend. Mrs. Chen, her instructor, watched with professional pride. Her classmates, no longer the strangers they had been at the year's start, listened with genuine appreciation. And Ms. Hartley sat in the back, watching the student she had once dismissed now shine with undeniable brilliance. After graduation, Maya spent her summer at the music camp, an experience that opened her world even further. She met other young musicians from around the country, each with their own story and passion. She learned from master teachers, performed in concerts, and grew not just as a pianist but as a person. When she returned home at the end of summer, she was more confident, more skilled, and more certain of her path forward. The following school year, Maya moved on to middle school. But her impact on her elementary school remained. Ms. Hartley continued teaching 5th grade, but she was different now. She started each year by telling her students about a girl who had taught her an important lesson about assumptions and potential. She never used Maya's name, but many students had heard the story and knew who she meant. Ms. Hartley established a fund to help students access music lessons, art supplies, and other enrichment activities. She reached out to local businesses and community members, explaining that talent could be found anywhere if people were willing to look and help. The fund grew steadily, helping dozens of students over the years pursue interests their families couldn't otherwise afford. Maya's story spread beyond her school. Local newspapers wrote articles about the girl who taught herself piano and silenced her doubters with her talent. She was invited to play at community events, fundraisers, and celebrations. She always accepted, remembering how isolated she had once felt and wanting to inspire other children who might be struggling in silence. Years later, when Maya was in high school and performing with the Youth Symphony, she occasionally ran into Ms. Hartley at concerts and community events. Their relationship had evolved into something neither could have predicted that day in the classroom. They weren't quite friends, but there was mutual respect and understanding between them. Ms. Hartley would always stop to ask about Maya's music, sharing genuine interest in her progress. In one of these conversations, Ms. Hartley told Maya something she had never said before. She thanked the girl for not giving up during that performance, for having the courage to show her talent even when it would have been easier to fail as expected. She said that Maya had taught her more in those few minutes at the piano than she had learned in all her years of education, training. The teacher's voice cracked slightly as she spoke, and Maya saw tears in her eyes. Maya responded with grace, telling Ms. Hartley that everyone makes mistakes, that what matters is learning from them and trying to do better. She said that Ms. Hartley's efforts after that day had helped many students, that her willingness to change had been its own kind of courage. The conversation ended with a brief hug, a moment of connection between teacher and student that acknowledged their complicated history and its ultimately positive outcome. As Maya prepared to graduate from high school years later, already accepted to a prestigious music conservatory on a full scholarship, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that day in 5th grade. She had gone from a lonely girl stealing time at a community center piano to a recognized young talent with opportunities she once couldn't have imagined. But more importantly, she had learned that her voice mattered, that her gifts were valuable regardless of her circumstances. She thought about Ms. Hartley, about how one person's cruelty, meant to diminish, had accidentally created a platform for her to shine. She thought about how pain could transform into growth, how the worst moments could lead to the best outcomes. She didn't feel gratitude for being humiliated, but she felt proud of how she had handled it, how she had refused to shrink or hide when given every reason to do so. Maya understood now that her story wasn't just about a talented girl and a teacher who underestimated her. It was about resilience, about finding strength in unexpected places. It was about the importance of seeing people as they truly are rather than as we assume them to be. It was about how one moment of courage, one decision to show up fully, even when terrified, could change the trajectory of a life. The piano had been her refuge, her friend, her passion. But that day, when she sat down in front of her class and chose to play her heart out rather than protect herself by failing small, the piano became something more. It became her voice, her statement of worth, her declaration that she existed and mattered. And in playing, she had not only revealed her talent, but had also revealed the prejudices and assumptions of others, creating a moment of reckoning that rippled outward far beyond one classroom on one Friday afternoon. Maya's journey was far from over, but she knew now that whatever challenges lay ahead, she had the strength to face them. She had learned that lesson at a piano bench, under the cold gaze of a teacher who expected her to fail. Surrounded by classmates who didn't know her name, she had learned it in the most difficult way possible, but the lesson had taken root deep in her soul, where nothing could shake it loose. She was talented, she was worthy, and her story deserved to be heard.